this is the loser Donald of all loser Donalds. Because the reason I do this segment is because I know that it's going to get under his skin. Now, if you remember when I introed it, I said, look, the Democrats won't attack him this way, and they're wrong. They will talk about how he's sexist or racist, bigoted, xenophobic, etc. And they have ad nauseum. But that's not going to affect his voters. A lot of the voters on that side really like that. And so, when it comes to independents, unfortunately, some of them also don't mind it as much. They have other excuses for it. But what they won't like, and what Donald Trump won't like, is that he's not actually a winner. It's one thing to support a guy who's a bad guy, and you think, well, that's my bad guy. It's another thing to support a loser who can't get anything done. Now, I know that that's an effective way of attacking him, but I wouldn't do it if it wasn't true. And that's why we give the silly nickname of Loser Donald, like that he does with other people, like, oh, Crooked Hillary, Lion Ted, right? But you can't do it because we do a news show. So yes, of course we have commentary and perspective. Otherwise we wouldn't do a segment called Loser Donald. But it's got to be based in fact. So if he was actually a big winner and all of his real estate deals worked out and his casinos in Atlantic City were wonderful, I couldn't make it up, right? No, I picked that nickname because it's so true. It goes to the core of who Donald Trump is. That's why he had the 6 bankruptcies, and that's why I've been able to do over 80 of these so far, where it's just one pathetic, miserable failure after another. The reality is he's an incredibly rich guy because his dad was rich. His dad left behind $200 million. And the main claim to fame that Donald Trump had was putting his name in all these buildings and with a big spotlight on, and then working the politicians and giving them oftentimes legalized bribes to get giant tax breaks. Without daddy's money and tax breaks, Donald Trump would have absolutely nothing. I think that I've proven that case. If you're not convinced, go watch those 80 videos. But now, this one is about what Donald Trump is most afraid of. And are you ready for this? I'm going to quote Sam Reisman at Mediaite. Based on interviews that Donald Trump did the year before he started running. This was in 2014, just 2 years ago. He did it with Michael D'Antonio, who's a Pulitzer Prize winning reporter, and he eventually wrote the biography, The Truth About Trump. So these are Trump's own words that are summarized here at Mediaite, New York Times, etc. First, Reisman at Mediaite. He explains in summary, what drives Donald Trump, in his own words, is a persistent, obsessive fear of losing status and being seen in public as a loser. I told you. What did I say was the thing that would bother him the most? And why does it bother him the most? Because it's the thing that's the most true and he knows it. In reality, his dad was actually a successful businessman, whatever else you might think of his dad. He's been trying to impress daddy and he couldn't do it, and his dad had to bail him out over and over again. He gives him a $7 million loan. He bails him out when his casinos are going bankrupt, another $3.5 billion. He gets him a $35 million line of credit. The idiot can't even spend that right. He needs to extend it to $38 million line of credit. This is all because of daddy. But he can't make daddy happy because daddy knows his son's a loser and he has to keep bailing him out. So that's buried inside Donald Trump. And when he talks to anyone, it comes out, that insecurity just pours on out. And that's what you see in the interviews here. So now let me go to Michael Barbaro at the New York Times explaining the interviews. He said, in more than 5 hours of conversations, the last extensive biographical interviews Mr. Trump granted before running for president, a powerful driving force emerges: his deep-seated fear of public embarrassment. So there's so many instances in the tapes where he talks about, oh, this one guy, we were at a fancy get-together with the richest people in New York, and he got drunk and we had to carry him out. And he's like, oh, that's so humiliating. Can't believe that someone would get exposed as a loser like that. He goes skiing with Ivana Trump before they're married. And he thinks, I'm going to impress her. He goes down the slope first. He doesn't know Ivana Trump's actually an excellent skier. She goes down the slope, and apparently there's a couple of flips, which is amazing. And if I saw that when I was on a date with someone, I'd be like, whoa, that's awesome. Let me see that again, right? Donald Trump literally takes off his skis and walks down the mountain. And he says to her, never do that again. Because he got embarrassed that she's a better skier than him. Oh, that's so sad. That's why he ends so many of his tweets with sad. Because that's what he thinks about himself. It's conservative projection 101. Whatever you think about yourself, you say about others, right? This guy who his whole life is centered around entitlement. Like he feels entitled to being rich, entitled to all these things because that's how he grew up, incredibly spoiled. And what's his number one thing that he doesn't like? Oh, the entitlements. I can't believe people are getting entitlements. What does he think about himself? Sad. So what does he tweet all the time? Sad. Okay. Now, another example was Arsenio Hall. And now Arsenio Hall was successful. He had movies, he had a talk show, it had a good run, got canceled eventually. But no, he thinks Arsenio Hall is total loser because people aren't paying attention to him anymore and he doesn't have a TV show anymore. He goes, he's dead as a doornail, dead as dog meat. And he says, he couldn't get on television. They wouldn't even take his phone call. That's what he's deathly afraid of. Oh my God, what if they don't take my phone call? What if they realize I'm the loser that I know I am? Okay, now his need for validation and attention. They explain. Of this, however, Mr. Trump is certain. He needs the world's attention and its embrace, a life force that has sustained him for decades. He recalled the feeling of walking into a giant room and watching as the crowd surrounded him, as if he were a magnet attracting everything around him. Mr. Dan Antonio asked him when that first started. Long time ago, Mr. Trump replied. It's always been that way. Did it ever unnerve him, the author wondered? No, Mr. Trump said. I think what would unnerve me is if it didn't happen. Oh, he needs that validation so bad because he never got it from Daddy. And Daddy knew who he was. The thing that he fears most, that you'll find out what kind of a loser he is. There's so much to this. If you watch those, listen to those 5 hours of tapes, you'll never vote for Donald Trump because you get a sense this guy's just trying to make up for all of his insecurities and how he feels insufficient. So I'll leave you with this quote on this issue. The author asked him, why don't you ever do any introspection? You know, we've been talking for 5 hours and you just refuse to kind of look at yourself and figure out what you did wrong, what you did right. And he says, this is so telling, quote, I don't like to analyze myself because I might not like what I see. Indeed. Now, I end a lot of these loser Donalds, but you know, making fun of him and saying loser or things along those lines. But now it's so clearly true that I feel bad for him. Now, I'll feel a lot worse for him after he loses and he's no longer a danger to the country and to the world. So don't let up yet. And whatever you do, understand who he really is and what he'll do to our country. But the guy's a really sad guy inside. And he knows the reality of himself. He knows that he's never been successful at business. He knows he doesn't have $10 billion. He knows that he doesn't even have $1 billion. He knows that's why he doesn't release his tax returns. You might not know because the press didn't cover it as much, but he knows his dad bailed him out all those different times. He knows all the loans his dad gave him. He knows the inheritance his dad gave him. You know, the old saying that Governor Richards had about George W. Bush applies to Trump too. He was born on third base and thought he hit a triple. But in the case of Donald Trump, he knows he didn't hit a triple. And he's been trying to make up for it his entire life, but he can't because he doesn't have it in him. Because he's not actually a winner. He's been a fraud his entire life. And after he loses this election, his final dramatic loss, after that, I'll feel bad for him. The whole 2-hour podcast of the Young Turks, commercial free, all the network shows, and you get to be part of independent media.
This is huge.
It really is. All that at tytnetwork.com/join.